Night shifts often bring a unique sense of quietness and solitude, but for some, this eerie silence turns into pure terror. The following two stories recount real-life disturbing experiences from those who worked the night shift, where things went terribly wrong. These tales are based on first-hand accounts, and their chilling nature will leave you questioning what lurks in the darkness. Story 1. The Shadow in the Hospital. Sarah had been working as a nurse in a small-town hospital for 3 years. It wasn't her dream job, but it paid the bills, and she enjoyed helping others. Hospitals, as many know, can be unsettling at night. The lights are dimmed, and the usual hum of activity slows to a crawl, leaving only the steady beep of machines to break the silence. It was during one of these quiet nights that Sarah experienced something she would never forget. Sarah's shift that night started as usual. She was assigned to the geriatric ward, a section of the hospital that was quieter than others, since most patients were elderly and needed less frequent attention. Around 2 a.m., Sarah decided to do her routine check on the patients, making sure everyone was stable and comfortable. As she walked down the hallway, she noticed something strange. One of the rooms, which should have been empty, had its light on. She knew for a fact that no one had been assigned to that room since the patient had been transferred to another hospital the day before. Curious, she approached the door cautiously. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing an empty bed with neatly folded sheets. The room was entirely empty except for a faint odor that Sarah couldn't quite place, something like rotting flowers. She quickly switched off the light and stepped back into the hallway, brushing it off as a simple oversight. But that would be the last time she felt any sense of normalcy that night. An hour later, Sarah was sitting at her desk in the nurse's station, updating patient records, when she caught something out of the corner of her eye. In the reflection of the glass window across from her, she saw a dark shadow move down the hallway. It was a fleeting glimpse, so fast that she wasn't even sure if she had really seen it. Thinking it might be a trick of the light, she stood up and looked down the hall. But it was empty. Sarah shook her head, dismissing the thought, and returned to her work. But just as she sat down, a faint whisper echoed through the empty ward. Her body went cold. It wasn't uncommon for patients to talk in their sleep, but this sound, it was different. It felt deliberate, almost as if someone was calling her name. Feeling a growing sense of unease, Sarah decided to do one more check on the patients. As she walked past the room she had noticed earlier, she heard the sound of someone breathing heavily. Her pulse quickened. Slowly, she turned the knob and opened the door. There, standing at the far end of the room, was a figure, tall, dark, and featureless. It wasn't a person, but a shadow, seemingly attached to nothing. Its black mass shifted ever so slightly as if it were breathing. Frozen in place, Sarah couldn't speak. The figure moved closer, and the temperature in the room dropped. The shadow's presence felt suffocating, like the weight of it was pushing the air out of her lungs. Panicking, she slammed the door shut and bolted down the hallway. When she finally made it back to the nurse's station, Sarah looked back toward the room, but the shadow was gone. No one else had seen it. The rest of the shift passed in a haze, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, had been watching her. She never worked the night shift in that ward again. Story 2. The Ghost in the Gas Station. Mark had been working as a night shift clerk at a 24-hour gas station for just over a year. The job was usually uneventful, save for the occasional drunk customer or the late-night trucker stopping for coffee. But one particular night, something far more disturbing would come his way. It was a Wednesday, and Mark's shift started at midnight. The station was located on the outskirts of town, surrounded by nothing but empty fields and an old highway that barely saw any traffic after dark. It was the perfect recipe for a quiet night, or so he thought. Around 2:30 a.m., Mark was sitting behind the counter, sipping his coffee and scrolling through his phone when the door chime rang. He looked up, expecting to see a customer, but no one was there. Strange, he thought. Maybe the wind had triggered it somehow. He stood up and walked to the door, looking outside, but there was no sign of anyone. Shaking off the weirdness, Mark returned to his seat. But a few minutes later, the chime rang again. This time, he immediately looked at the security monitor. There was a figure standing outside, just on the edge of the camera's view. A woman, dressed in what looked like a long white gown, her hair obscuring her face. Mark felt a chill run down his spine. Who would be out there, dressed like that, in the middle of the night? He stepped out from behind the counter to get a better look, but as soon as he opened the door, she was gone. Hours passed, and Mark couldn't shake the image of the woman. He kept glancing at the security feed, half expecting her to return. It wasn't until nearly 4 a.m. that things took a more sinister turn. The gas station was deathly quiet when Mark heard a noise, like someone tapping on the glass. He turned toward the large front windows, and there she was, standing just inches away, staring directly at him through the glass. Her face was pale, with dark sunken eyes that seemed void of any life. Panicked, Mark backed away from the counter, but as he did, the lights in the store began to flicker. The tapping grew louder and more aggressive, echoing through the station. Mark's heart raced. He grabbed his phone to call for help, but before he could dial, the lights went out completely, plunging the store into darkness. For a moment, everything was still. Then, from behind him, Mark heard the sound of footsteps, soft, deliberate, and getting closer. He turned around, but no one was there. His breath quickened as he felt a cold draft brush past him, almost like someone, or something, was standing right beside him. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, and the store was empty again. But when Mark looked at the security monitor, he saw the woman standing behind the counter, staring directly at the camera. In a blind panic, Mark ran outside, not stopping until he was a good distance from the gas station. He waited in his car until his shift ended, refusing to go back inside. The next day, Mark told his manager about the incident, but the security footage showed nothing unusual. There was no trace of the woman, no flickering lights, just Mark, standing behind the counter, staring into space. His manager laughed it off, calling it a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But Mark knew better. He quit the job the following week, and to this day, he refuses to drive past that gas station at night. The night shift holds a special kind of horror, where the boundaries between the real and the supernatural blur. For Sarah and Mark, what started as just another night at work turned into something far more terrifying than they could have ever imagined. Their experiences serve as a chilling reminder that sometimes it's not just the darkness we should fear, it's what might be lurking in it.